The Air Force is moving quickly as it investigates mistakes that allowed a gunman to purchase the rifle used to kill 26 people Sunday at a Texas church.
I was home when I heard the shots.
New cell phone video shows a visibly shaken and barefoot Stephen Williford talking to police just moments after shooting and chasing gunman Devin Kelly. Kelly was found dead in his car with several gunshot wounds, including one to his head that police say was self-inflicted.
We hit about 95 going down 539 trying to catch this guy.
It was filmed by Johnny Langendorf, the man Williford flagged down to help drive after Kelly.
Today, we have with us on the podcast Stephen Williford. Many of you may recognize his name. It came to national prominence soon after a tragic event in Sutherland Springs, Texas.
Based on what you saw, was there any indication the shooter gave anybody any mercy?
No, his methodology was meticulous and calculated and total.
I had yelled out as I ran across the street, and he heard me inside the church. He came outside the church and started shooting at me. He had on Class 3 body armor and a ballistic bulletproof helmet. And God spoke to me and said, "Don't worry about that. Do what I sent you here for." I heard that in my head.
I think my God, my Lord, protected me and gave me the skills to do what needed to be done.
This is Mary Starr. Welcome to Awake to Truth podcast. Stephen, again, I am so thankful to have you with us on Awake to Truth podcast. We are so thrilled to have you with us. We have a lot in common. It was amazing when I saw the pictures of the little church in Sutherland Springs, how similar it looks in appearance to the one I attend now. So I was just like, wow, this is really special. So I'm going to let you just start sharing your story. I've read a lot about it. I think a lot of our listeners probably are very familiar with it. But if you'll please just share your story about that day.
On November 5th, 2017, I stayed home from church myself because I was going to start an on-call at the hospital where I worked. And the older daughter came into my room and said, "Dad, doesn't that sound like gunfire?" And to me, when she said that, it sounded like someone tapping at my window.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "No, come into the kitchen, it's louder." I realized it was gunfire, told her that. And my oldest daughter ran outside, got in her car to run up the street to find out what it was. Immediately, I ran for my safe, and I opened up the safe, and I called my wife. And I said, "Where are you at?" She said, "I'm at Rachel's house. What's going on?" And I said, "Well, somebody's shooting up the Baptist church." And she said, "Don't go over there." And I hung up the phone. I grabbed an AR-15, a magazine full, and a handful of ammunition. I just popped open a brand new box of ammunition. My daughter came back through the door and said, "Dad, there's someone in black tactical gear shooting up the church." I said, "Did you call 911?" She said, "I did. They're aware of it." So what that told me immediately was that the police are coming, and they're coming hard to a mass shooting. And I ran out the door because Sutherland Springs total population is under 600 people. And we are far away from the nearest police department. And I didn't know how long that it was going to take for the police to show up. And as I ran out the door, I truly believe the Holy Spirit took over me. I was thinking more clearly than I had ever thought in my life. And my daughter followed me out of the door. And I turned and looked at her. I said, "Go back in the house and load me another magazine." I said, "I just have a handful of ammunition and I may need it." Now, I knew my daughter couldn't run in the house and load a magazine and come running across the street to give me a magazine during a gunfight. But I knew he had already had more people that I cared about, and I didn't need her as another distraction. And she would have become a target. And I would have been
Right.
more worried about her than what I was going into. And so she
Mhm.
went back in the house. And as I ran across the street, and I can't explain this other than I truly believe that God called out a demon that was in the church. Because inside the church, he had just shot Julie Workman through the breast and then skipped one off the concrete into her leg. She was laying under a pew. And Chris Workman, her son, was a praise ministry leader. And he had shot Chris through the pew in the back, instantly paralyzing Chris from the waist down. And Chris said he was pointing the pistol directly at him. And Chris said, I just knew I was going to meet Jesus. And he said, then I heard you yell. He said, when he heard me yell, the shooter's expression on his face changed, and he dropped his rifle in the church and came out of the church building shooting at me with a pistol. I had yelled out as I ran across the street, and he heard me inside the church. And if you think about that yell,
Mhm.
must have been quite something because their ears were probably ringing from the shots inside the
Mhm.
church and all the mayhem that was going on inside the church. And they heard me as I yelled, as I ran. My daughter in the house heard me when I yelled. So that must have been quite a yell. And
Must have been.
he came outside the church and started shooting at me. He had on class 3 body armor and a ballistic bulletproof helmet. My worst nightmare had been recognized. And honestly, I saw the slide work. I saw the flash from the muzzle. I saw the brass rolling out of the pistol in slow motion. And God spoke to me and said, don't worry about that. Do what I sent you here for. I heard that in my head. And I ran behind a Dodge pickup truck and came up over the hood. And I hit him in the left chest. I hit him in the abdomen. Both of those stopped by the body armor. And he hit the truck in front of me, shattered the windshield of the car behind me, hit the house behind me. But when I hit him, he momentarily stopped shooting at me and ran for his vehicle. It was sitting in the middle of the street with the driver's side door open and the engine running. And when he turned to his side, I was able to put one between the plates. And I was able to put one in his legs. And he got into his vehicle. He slammed the door. He put 2 more rounds through the side window. And I saw those holes open up and the glass fall, all in slow motion. And I really couldn't see his head from the reflection of the glass.
Mhm.
I put one where I thought his head was, and the police say that split his forehead open right underneath the rim of the helmet.
Wow.
Accelerated the car, turned the corner, and was fleeing as fast as the car would carry him. And by the time I ran into the middle of the street, he was about 150 yards away and fleeing. I put one through the back windshield. It shattered the back windshield. It went through the driver's side seat, hit him or right of the left shoulder blade, excuse me. And he went over the hill and out of sight. And I'm standing in the street saying, it can't end this way. And then I looked off to my left and I saw a truck parked at the stop sign. And I ran over and I tapped on the window and said, "That guy just shot up the church and we have to stop him."
Did you
And
know the owner and driver of that truck?
I had never met him before in my life.
Wow.
And any sane person in this world would have just jammed on the gas and left me standing there at the stop sign. But this is Texas we're talking about. We're not known for sanity, are we? So
No.
next thing I heard were the locks open on the truck, and I climbed up in the cab of the truck, and long, tall Texan with a white Western hat, toothpick hanging out of his mouth, a longhorn skull tattooed in the middle of his neck, and the horns went up underneath his ears. He's almost a cartoon of Texas.
That's
Accelerated,
good.
accelerated, turned the corner, and we were off to the races. And at that moment, we didn't even see the murderer. And he was on the phone driving and on the phone, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was on the phone with dispatch. And he was giving them a description of where we were and how, each crossroads that we crossed. He would say, "Now we're here." And I dropped the magazine to my rifle, and I looked, and I had one round in the top of the magazine, one in the chamber. That meant I had 2 rounds left. And I looked at him and I said, "Tell them, hurry, hurry. I have 2 rounds left." And he's still got on class 3 body armor. And right there, he could have stopped the chase and said, "Okay, I'm out."
I'm out.
But instead, he continued to chase. And we went over the top of a hill and around a curve. And I said, "That's him. A gray SUV, back windshield shot out. That's him.
Mhm.
That's him." And I looked and I said, "And it's Johnny Langendorf is his name." I looked at him and I said, "If you catch him, you're going to have to put him off the side of the road." And Johnny turned and looked at me. He said, "Yep, I already figured that." He's probably thinking in his head, "I always wanted to try a pit maneuver." But
Here's my chance.
when he realized he was being chased, he pulled his vehicle off to the left, off the road, or off to the right, off to the road,
Mhm.
with a sign in front of him and a sign depicting a curve. And he was in the ditch with a sign in front of him. And I thought he didn't even leave himself a way out. He parked so close to the
Mhm.
sign he couldn't. And Johnny pulled up with Johnny's front bumper, even with the guy's rear bumper, still on the pavement. And he stopped. And I put the passenger side window down, and I was going to step out and use the door as a shield. So I opened up the door with my left hand and pushed it open, and I was going to step out and use the door as a shield. And before my foot hit the ground, he accelerated, hit the sign in front of him. It flipped over the vehicle and onto the ground, and he went right back up on the road. And Johnny took off after him. I barely had enough time to get my foot back in the vehicle before
Mhm.
Johnny was chasing him again. And he went about 3/4 of a mile up the road from there, and halfway around the curve that the sign indicated. This time he swerved off to the left hand side of the road and through a fence and about 50 yards out into a field, and he stopped. And Johnny pulled up behind him, still on the road, and stopped. And I told Johnny, I said, "Just get down below the dash and stay out of gunfire." And I got out and put the rifle over the hood of the truck again and started yelling, "Get out, get out." And Johnny pulled out his phone and started videoing me, live streaming on Facebook.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
yeah, he was live streaming it. And I waited, by the police estimate, between 5 and 7 minutes before the first police officer showed up. And I think at one point I even yelled out, "Where are the police?" Because here I am standing there and I can't, the vehicle is parked kind of at an angle,
Mhm.
50 yards in front of me. I couldn't see into it and I didn't know what was going on. And I've got my rifle out over the hood of a truck and I'm thinking, where are the police? I never wanted to see red and blue lights more in my life than that moment.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And finally I heard off to the left, "Driver, get out of the vehicle with your hands up." And I turned and looked off to my left, and there was a police cruiser about 50 yards farther up the road from me. Uh, and the officer was standing behind his door with a pistol in his right hand and a microphone in his left. And he keyed the mic again. He said, "Driver, get out of the vehicle with your hands up." And I'm going to tell your audience, if you're ever confronted with this situation, the police may not know who you are or what's going on. You want to make sure that that officer is comfortable because that officer wants to go home to his family that night. So I
Mhm.
laid my rifle on the hood of the truck and I started coming back to the back of the truck, fingers spread, palms out, hands up, and started walking to the back of Johnny's truck. And the officer made eye contact with me. He keyed the mic and he said, "Not you." And
He probably wanted your backup.
he did. And but I didn't know that he knew who I was. I know
Right.
we were talking to dispatch, but I don't want to take any chances that he
No,
doesn't
you did the
know.
right.
And so I made it my way back to the rifle and picked it up and pointed back again at the car. I only had 2 rounds left and I had a rifle. I was about 50 yards. He was about 100 yards from us and he had a pistol. Uh,
Yeah.
and so he wasn't done with me yet. And so I sat there until about 5 or 6 more police cars showed up, and each of them got out of their cars and pulled out AR-15s. And I'm like, I am done. I pulled the rifle off the hood of the truck and I walked around and laid it back on the toolbox on Johnny's truck. And now I'm trying to get my feet into the shade of Johnny's truck because I was barefoot. I ran across the road with no shoes on. And people say, "Really, you didn't put shoes on?" And I said, "You're lucky I had pants on." Because I was hearing the shots. I knew those shots were
Mhm.
aimed at someone I cared about. And I couldn't take time to put shoes on. I had to have time to get my rifle, but I didn't have time to put shoes on. And so now it was 90 degrees that day.
Wow.
And my feet were beginning to get really hot on the pavement. And I waited another 30 to 45 minutes probably while they were waiting. And I didn't know what the police were thinking about it. I'm thinking, are they waiting for him to bleed to death? I'm okay with that. But I needed to know I was an island all to myself at Johnny's truck. Johnny had already fled and gone back to the police line. And I'm there by myself. Finally, I decided that I was going to make a dash and run back to the police line. And I started to, and they came on a PA system, said, "No, no, 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 wait, we'll bring up a police cruiser for you to use for cover to get back to us." And they pulled a police cruiser up, and I kind of squatted down beside it and made it back to the police line. And they put me setting on a guardrail. And I found out later what they had sent an officer had gotten a drone for his birthday 2 weeks prior to that.
Wow.
And they didn't know what was going on in the vehicle. So they sent this officer back home to get a drone so that they could fly the drone over and look inside the car and see what was going on. And that made sense. Why risk an officer's life when you can send a drone over and take a look and see
Mhm.
what's going on?
Right.
But at this time, I was sitting on a guardrail and I saw 200 yards up the road, the fire department had set up a roadblock to keep people from going down where we were. And I could see my wife's car there. And there was no one in this world that I desired to speak to more than my wife. I wanted to tell her I was okay. And I wanted to tell her my emotion. And an officer walked past, and I said, "Excuse me, can I call my wife?" He said, "Oh, absolutely, go ahead." And he kept walking. I said, "No, no, can I borrow your phone?" He looked at me, he said, "You don't have a phone?" And I looked down, I said, "I don't have shoes on." My phone was the least important thing that I could think of. Well, sure.
Right.
He pulled out his phone and he handed me his phone, and I called my wife. And again, my wife is one of the most wise people that I know, because I broke down immediately when hearing her voice. And I said, "Baby, I think I killed someone." And she said, "You did what you had to do." I said, "But it doesn't make it any easier." And she said, "I know, but I'm proud of you." I thought that, honestly, I thought that I was going to jail, but I thought they would book me, and that with the evidence, eventually it would work its way out.
Mhm.
And if anybody thinks, if you're ever involved in something like this, and you think, "I might go to jail if I pull my gun today," if it's not worth going to jail, you probably shouldn't pull your gun. But I knew that if I did not, that people were going to die, and that was worth me going to jail for. So I sat there. They hopped me from police car to police car because there were so many, not only Wilson County, but Comal County, Bear County. They hopped me from police car to police car, different, and I gave interviews, and lawyers will tell you, "Shut up and lawyer up." But they kept promising me that they would let me go home. And that's all I wanted, is just to go home. I wanted to go hug my kids, my family. I wanted to go home. I wanted to see my wife. And they said, "Well, when the Texas Rangers get here, you can give a statement. They'll take over the whole crime scene. You can give a statement, and then you can go home." And I waited down there for 4.5 hours. And the Texas Rangers did come up, and I got in the car with him, and I gave him my statement, and he looked at me and said, "Mr. Williford, you can go home now." uh, to my amazement. And I was walking that 200 yards to my wife's car, and a lady came up behind me and said, "Mr. Williford, I need to speak with you for a minute." And I turned around, and a very pleasant looking lady was standing behind me, and her mascara was all messed up. She had been crying. And she said, "I had friends in that church." And the first thing I ask is, "How bad is it?" Because no one would tell me. The police wouldn't tell me. No one would tell me. She said, "It's really bad." She said, "But there's anything I can do for you. Here's my card. I'm the DA of Wilson County." Boy, I grabbed that card out of her hand so fast, I bet it smoked her fingers. Uh, and that's the way it ended up going, is the DA was my best friend. Julie got up and screamed. She saw a little girl that had just been swinging around her legs, praising God, shot in the head and dead. And she screamed. And Gunny yelled out, "Wake up, Julie. We need you." None of this took God by surprise. He made you for this moment. Julie Workman was a emergency room nurse. And so Gunny woke her up out of her mindset. And still bleeding from her own wounds, she got up and started tying tourniquets and saving lives inside the church. And then a little girl cried out, "I'm scared." And Gunny took her and started singing "Jesus Loves Me" with this little girl. What a Marine. What a man. Zach Poston was 17-year-old senior in high school. Zach Poston got shot 7 times. But before the shooter turned to Zach, Zach took his foot and shoved that little girl that Gunny was taking care of. He had shoved her under the pew to safety. And the murderer saw Zach when he did that and shot Zach 7 times. And Zach's grandmother crawled on top of him, saving Zach's life and sacrificing her own in the process. And Zach was able to walk across the stage with his graduating class. The first police officer that was on the scene ran right in looking for an active shooter. He didn't wait. He was the first one in, and there were 2 officers with him. One was a game warden. And the game warden's probably thinking, I didn't sign up for this.
Probably so.
But he ran right in. And I think courage is contagious. And so Hank Barnett showed the courage to run point and go straight into and his sergeant was behind him, and the game warden right with them. And Hank is one of those officers that if you look at him, you look at him and and I said one time, my wife said he looks like he's all of 12 years old. And I said, oh, come on, baby. He looks at least 15. Give him 15, but he looks young. And he had been collecting trauma kits out of his own pocket, had been paying for them and keeping them in his police cruiser out of his own pockets, and was asked before, what are you expecting with all this trauma kits that you keep buying? He would say, you never know what might happen. And when he realized the shooter was gone, he opened up his trunk of his police car and distributed out trauma kits with tourniquets, and he tied 4 tourniquets himself before the first EMS showed up. And then when EMS showed up, he got back. He heard that there was a crash scene. He got back in his police cruiser and ran down to the crash scene. He went back into warrior mode after saving lives and passing out trauma kits so Julie and everybody else could start saving each other. And what a miracle he is. And he's a good friend of mine now. And
Stephen, I'm just going to say I had researched this subject pretty exhaustively before today, and so much of what you're sharing was never mentioned. And these are the important parts. These are the God miracles that got left out of all of those things that
the
I
very
read.
University Hospital in San Antonio, the very hospital that I worked for, that I was going to be on call for, was having a active shooter drill that day.
You have got to be kidding me.
And all the doctors and nurses were complaining because they had never had a drill on a Sunday before. And they were saying, why are we having a drill on a Sunday when we could be spending time with our families at church? And when the real call came out, since they had all the doctors and nurses on staff, They were able to get all 20 ORs up and running before the first victim showed up. And if you can't see God's
That's
hand in something, you're willfully blind.
that's so true. I'm in shock and awe, and I'm trying really hard to just hold my composure, and it's not easy.
Well, it's not for me also. You can see even this many years into it, it's still really emotional for me. Um, I've written a book about it. It's a town called Sutherland Springs, and you can read about all the miracles that happen. Not one, so all the children in the church were sent to University Hospital. All the adults were sent to SAMSI, which, if your audience doesn't know what SAMSI is, it's the world's largest military hospital. It's in San Antonio. It's where all of our armed forces train in the medical field, is in San Antonio, Texas. And SAMSI, I'm going to tell you, if I've got a gunshot wound, I can't think of a better place to be than SAMSI. But neither of the hospitals lost one patient that showed up at the hospital. They were able to patch and put them back together and save their lives. What an amazing place University Hospital was. It's ranked number 8 in the nation for trauma
Wow.
and number 2 in the state of Texas for trauma. And you want to bet that SAMSI is number 1 in the state of Texas for trauma? I
Mhm.
would say so.
It's good to live that close to that kind of quality medical care.
It's amazing. It's
Hmm.
amazing. And the EMTs, and we had so many ambulances that showed up, and the air life people. I've since then got opportunity to speak to them and stuff, and I can't say enough good about our emergency services and our men and women that just devote their lives to saving lives.
Mhm. I just am still just sitting here in my mind going over the different miracles that all came into play that day, and only, I guess my words are only God. I mean, the officer that had been saving up these trauma kits, the
I,
officer that had got the uh, drone for his birthday, the ER nurse that was in church that day. The list goes on.
and what's great, I now work for Gun Owners of America. I'm going to put in a cheap
Mhm.
plug for
Wow.
that.
Well, I'm
Because
glad you're going to. I was going to go there next, so you just gave me the perfect segue. So tell us how you became affiliated with them after obviously leaving the hospital. I'm intrigued to know how that all played out.
well, I was again, I worked for the hospital at the time, and I was being so the governor was asking me to come to roundtables on gun control because I was fighting gun control. Because had I not owned an AR-15 and be able to use my AR-15, coming up against a man with class 3 body armor and me being barefoot, it could have gone south real quickly. So I became very active in fighting gun control and stuff, and fighting for our rights to own AR-15s. I was a competitive shooter when I was a young man and a shooting coach. I actually helped train a young lady that set women's collegiate national record with a pistol. So I was very active in shooting. I shot on a church um, pistol team, and we all went to the same church, and we started shooting in competition. We called ourselves the sinners. And the word sin in the Bible, most people don't know the word sin in the Bible is an archery term, meaning missing the target. And we saw that as an opportunity to witness to people and there were 5 of us on our centers team, and we got quite good. We have plenty of first place trophies and stuff to show that we were good. One of our centers was a San Antonio police officer at the time, was a former Army Ranger. And in between competitions, we would shoot because it's golfing, but for men.
Right.
And so we would shoot, Colonel Grossman said, a golf course is the willful misuse of a perfectly good rifle range. And what it means by that is everything you do for a hobby should have a practical purpose. And so, in between our competitions, this former Army Ranger would train me what he knew. And for 3 weeks straight, he trained me what to do if ever confronted with body armor.
Wow.
And why would an old beat up plumber need to know what to do if ever confronted with body armor?
God
Because
knew you were going to need that.
God had a purpose. God knew I
Yes,
was
he did.
at some point, and I talk in picture words, if you will. So it's like God was forming me into a tool, and as a plumber, I would say form me into a chisel. He sat there and he formed his chisel and he opened his toolbox and he put me in that toolbox and said, someday I'm going to need you. When that day happened, he pulled out his chisel and he grabbed his hammer and he used me for a very tough purpose.
Yes.
And when he was done, I was broken, but I got his will done.
Yes.
And now God pulls out his file and he's filing me. And sometimes it's painful, but he's making me back into his tool. He's repairing me. He doesn't leave his tools broken. And the only thing I can do is I can pray to God and ask that he not use me in such a tough way again.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, I am God's tool. And if he chooses to use me in a tough situation again, I will be his tool. But I think what I'm doing for gun owners of America is the softer things that I have been asked to do. And that's fighting for our rights for our children and our grandchildren. I now have, when I started the story, again, understand that it's been less than 7 years ago. I
Right.
have 8 grandchildren now.
That's
And when I started the story, I told you my daughter was pregnant with my first grandchild.
mhm.
So my oldest grandchild just turned 6, and I have 8 of them.
Wow. So you are a grassroots and industry liaison with Gun Owners of America. What does an average day look like for you, or do you have an average day?
I don't have average days.
I,
Uh,
I
I'm
kind of had a feeling, but I thought I would ask.
I'm on salary,
Hmm.
so I do 5 to 6 either radio shows or podcasts per week on average,
Hmm.
and just like this one.
Hmm.
I do when they ask me to go and speak at a capital at another state, they put me on an airplane and I fly and I fight for your rights. Uh, on the 27th through the 30th, they're flying me to Iowa for Gun Con is what it's called, and it's held at Brownells. So there's a day at the range, so we'll do a little shooting, and then the next day we're going to the warehouse, the Brownells warehouse, where they're bringing in all the manufacturers and stuff, and I'll be signing people up for Gun Owners of America. You can find us at gunowners.org.
Hmm.
I'll be signing people up for that. And I'll also be doing a book signing for my book, a town called Sutherland Springs. You can find it at gunowners.org, and you can also find it at Amazon, where it held the #1 Christian biography sales for a while. So it was a best-selling book in the Christian biography for a while. And
Congratulations. That's a wonderful honor.
what an honor. What an honor. When it
Yes.
first came out, it was the best-selling new release, and then became the best-selling Christian biography. And I can't think of a better category for my book to fill in.
No, it's absolutely spot on and perfect. So, one of the reasons that I had wanted to interview you is we've done a number of podcasts on border issues, and we're still doing that. But now, with so many known criminals that they're already here, they've already crossed the border. Now, I think it's important that we add to our message: how do we protect ourselves? How do we defend ourselves? And your story, it doesn't get any better than your story, because you lived that out, and now you're helping teach people about it. So
And
thank you. Stephen, I'm just going to say thank you for being a hero. Thank you for being brave, and thank you for your service to your community, and now to the rest of America.
well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it has just been a delight. So, what would you like to say as we come to our closing?
I would like to say that we have allowed, and you can go to Barefoot Defender on YouTube. I've stopped doing videos, but when I was doing them, I did night vision cameras and body armor, and we went down and videoed our National Guard actually helping the illegal aliens and helping the drug cartels moving people across our borders. And
Wow.
so they are here. The terrorists, Hamas, Hezbollah, they are here. And what I can suggest is that you go out and get a gun, be willing and ready to defend yourself, your family, your friends, your community, and even your nation. Because I truly believe it's not if, I believe it's when we are attacked on a October 7th style attack. I believe it's going to be a coordinated attack. And the difference between us and Israel is we have our Second Amendment. And
Yes, we do.
you have the opportunity now to be able to buy a gun and to be ready for such an attack. And hopefully, if it is a well organized attack, that we can repel it. And
Yes.
ISIS attacked in Russia, where they killed over 150 something people, I think, at a concert. And if you watch those videos, and they're tough to watch, the the Russian people were standing against a wall, and ISIS just shot them and killed them.
Mhm.
And I will say that won't happen. I won't stand against a wall dumbfounded. If I'm there, I'm going to be moving and shooting back. And that's what our Second Amendment is about, is when our nation is attacked by foreign and domestic terrorists. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
right along with, if our government gets so tyrannical, that it's about that also. And that's
Mhm.
what our Second Amendment's about. We just won one, a big one, and at the Supreme Court, and got the bump stock ban overturned. Shall not be
Right.
infringed means exactly that. I don't own a bump stock, but shall not be infringed. I don't see a problem with anybody that chooses to. There's more good people in this world than there are bad people, and it's time for the good people to stand up and defend.
One of the comments that really was impactful to me in reading about that, Justice Thomas made a very profound statement. He said that bump stock does not make more shots go out of the end of the barrel any faster. And so what's the problem? And I thought, well, that was pretty insightful.
Absolutely. And here's what I believe. Even if it did in the hands of good people, what difference does it make anyway?
That's right.
Shall not be infringed means that this is going to be an inherently a dangerous nation. But who is the mass shooting? Who has succeeded in being mass shooting or mass murder more than governments? Governments worldwide have murdered millions of people, not just dozens. They have murdered millions of people. When a government goes rogue and becomes tyrannical, and most people don't even know that Russia, for instance, in the Russian Revolution, murdered more people than Nazi Germany. And they collected their guns before they did it. And
Of
then
course
Nazi
they did.
Germany collected their guns before they started murdering Jewish people and other people. And Mao Zedong did the same thing in China and right on out to Venezuela real recently. They collect guns and then they run over their people with tanks. Governments gone rogue, and you say, well, that'll never happen here. Human
Think
nature,
again.
human nature never changes. And when government gets too much power, somebody's going to get in power that thinks that they should rule over with an iron fist, and anybody that disagrees is dispensable.
I want to say thank you to you and to your associates at Gun Owners of America for protecting our Second Amendment rights. We thank you and we need you and we support you.
Thank you.